The emergency alarm started screaming before I even opened my eyes. Not the normal ship alert. Not a navigation warning. Not engine trouble. This was the end of the world alarm. A flat metallic tone echoed through the walls of my cabin over and over again, vibrating through the floor hard enough that I could feel it in my chest before I was fully awake. I rolled out of my bunk instantly. Years of military training do that to you. Your body moves before your brain catches up. I grabbed my jacket, slammed my boots onto the floor, and ran into the corridor, already hearing footsteps from the rest of the crew. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. My name is Yale Devar, Commander, Unified Defense Corps, 3rd Patrol Division. At the time this happened, I was 31 years old, stationed aboard the patrol vessel Ardent, somewhere beyond Jupiter's outer moons. We were 640 million kilometers from Earth, far enough away that space itself felt empty. The Ardent was not a warship. Not even close. We were a long-range patrol vessel assigned to maintenance duty, relay checks, deep space inspections, boring assignments nobody important wanted. The kind of mission where the biggest danger was dying of boredom. We were supposed to be out there for another 6 days. Instead, the galaxy ended before breakfast. I reached the bridge in less than a minute. The doors opened. Nobody spoke. That was the first thing I noticed. 7 crew members sitting frozen at their stations, staring at their screens in complete silence. Not confused silence. Shock. The kind of silence people fall into when reality stops making sense. Navigator Owen Price turned toward me first. His face looked drained of blood. "Commander," he said quietly, "we are receiving a priority distress signal. Origin." He swallowed once. Earth. Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. I moved to my command chair and pulled the transmission onto the main screen. For the rest of my life, I will never forget what I saw. The signal was damaged. Broken. Chunks of static tore through the footage every few seconds as relay stations across the solar system continued going offline one after another. But even through corrupted data, even through the interference, you could still see it. Earth was burning. Entire continents disappeared beneath massive clouds of black smoke. Parts of the oceans were boiling. Orbital stations drifted dead in space like broken bones floating around a corpse. And the communication grid, the greatest communication network humanity had ever built, was gone. Every satellite, every relay chain, every civilian channel. Silent. Dead. I checked the timestamp on the first signal. 22 hours old. My stomach turned cold. How long have we been receiving this? I asked. For minutes, Lena Ward answered from communications. Her voice sounded controlled, but only barely. The relay network collapsed almost completely. Signals are only now reaching outer sectors. What caused the damage? Nobody answered immediately. Because everybody already knew. Weapons Officer Callum Gray finally looked up from his console. Orbital bombardment, he said quietly. The bridge became completely still. I stared at him. Confirmed. He nodded slowly. The energy signatures match Vthrak Dominion fleet weapons. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The Vthrak Dominion. The largest empire humanity had ever encountered. An ancient multi-species civilization spread across dozens of star systems. Humanity had known about them for roughly 60 years. We traded with their merchants sometimes, argued with their diplomats occasionally, avoided provoking them constantly, because everybody understood the truth. They were massive. We were small. And small civilizations that annoyed the Dominion had a history of disappearing. Apparently, humanity had finally annoyed them. I pulled up the diplomatic records immediately. It did not take long to find the reason. 14 months earlier, 3 human colony ships had settled near the Orion threshold. The Dominion claimed the region belonged to them under some ancient expansion law written centuries before humans had ever left Earth. The Dominion issued warnings. Human colonial officials delayed responding. Mostly bureaucracy. Partly arrogance. Mostly because nobody honestly believed the Dominion would start a war over 3 small colonies containing less than 12,000 people. We were wrong. Horribly wrong. Because they had not attacked the colonies. They had attacked everything. every major human settlement, every orbital station, every populated region they could hit quickly enough. All at once. I sat there staring at the data for several long seconds. Then training took over. Emotion shuts down eventually. Numbers do not. Pull every surviving signal, I ordered. Anything human. Colonies. Patrol ships. Frontier outposts. Emergency frequencies. Everything. Lena nodded immediately and started working. Nobody else spoke. The bridge stayed silent except for keyboards clicking and the low hum of the ship around us. 17 minutes later, Lena finally looked up. Her face looked worse now. She transferred the report to my screen. Then the real horror arrived. Before the attack, humanity's total population across Earth and the colonies had been approximately 11 billion people. After the attack, best estimates showed somewhere between 350 and 400 million survivors remaining. That was it. Patrol crews, deep space workers, ships in transit, remote outposts too far away to matter. Everyone else. Gone. 7 billion dead. The human brain is not designed to understand a number that large. People think grief is loud. It isn't. Not at that scale. At that scale, grief becomes quiet. Cold. Almost mathematical. Your mind stops seeing people and starts seeing absence. I did not cry. Not because I was strong. Not because commanders are fearless. I didn't cry because my brain simply could not process 7 billion deaths all at once. Then the Dominion broadcast arrived. A galaxy-wide transmission. Every frequency. Every language they had on record. Including 17 human languages. The message was short. Formal. Calm. The kind of message written by people completely certain the situation was already finished. The voice said, "The human contagion has been reduced to acceptable levels." Nobody on the bridge moved. The message continued. Remaining populations may report to designated processing centers for integration into Dominion labor operations. Callum's jaw tightened. Further resistance will be considered hostile action and answered with complete elimination. The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge again. Contagion. That was the word they chose. Like humanity was a disease. Something dirty that had spread too far. Callum Gray spoke first. He was only 24 years old. His home city in northern England no longer existed. He stared at the dark screen for several seconds before finally looking at me. "Commander," he asked quietly, "what are your orders?" I thought about the burning oceans, the dead satellites, the billions of people erased in less than a day. I thought about the word contagion. Then I opened a secured transmission channel. Encrypted. Tight beam. Directed toward every surviving human signal we had found. I activated the microphone. "This is Commander Yale Devar of the patrol vessel Ardent." My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "To all surviving human personnel, do not respond on open channels." I paused. "Do not surrender yourselves to Dominion processing stations." Another pause. "Maintain radio silence and hold position." The crew watched me carefully. Then I said the sentence that changed everything. "The Dominion believes humanity is finished." I leaned toward the microphone. "It is not finished." I closed the channel. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Owen Price finally asked the question everybody else was thinking. "What do we do now?" I turned back toward the burning image of Earth one final time. Then I shut the screen off. Because staring at the dead longer would not bring them back. And because I suddenly understood something very important. The Dominion had made one enormous mistake. They thought survival and surrender were the same thing. They thought if you hit humanity hard enough, we would stop. But that is not how humans work. Humans become most dangerous after losing everything. I pulled a blank operation sheet from my desk, picked up a pen, and started writing the first words of the plan that would eventually terrify an empire. Operation Annihilation. The war had officially begun. The Ardent was never designed for war. I need you to understand that. Because later, when people talk about what humanity did after the bombardment, they imagine fleets gathering in secret. Massive weapons hidden in deep space. Admirals preparing revenge from underground bunkers. That is not what happened. Humanity's counterattack began with 11 exhausted people aboard a maintenance ship drifting through empty space beyond Jupiter. The Ardent carried one weak pulse cannon. One. Its main purpose was scaring pirates away from cargo routes. That was our terrifying military capability. We had enough food for 3 months. Enough fuel for slow long-range travel. A communication system designed for relay maintenance. And absolutely nothing that should have threatened the most powerful empire in known space. What we did have was time and distance. The Dominion thought humanity was dead. That assumption became our first weapon. For the next 6 hours, I locked myself inside my quarters with Lena's survival reports spread across my desk. No holograms. No digital mapping systems. Paper. Real paper. Because paper cannot be hacked. I studied every surviving signal we had. Every ship. Every outpost. Every mining station. Every emergency transmission fragment. Slowly, a picture began forming. Humanity was shattered. But not gone. And the surviving pieces were more useful than the Dominion realized. 47 deep space mining platforms still operational across the outer system. 22 colony transports still missing after the attack. 9 military vessels confirmed active. Only 2 actual warships. The rest patrol craft like ours. 30 frontier stations surviving near unexplored regions. And then, one ship changed everything. The logistics carrier crane. 700 meters long. Slow. Ugly. Built for industrial cargo transport. 3 years earlier, its internal loading bay had been modified with manufacturing systems capable of producing spacecraft components during long-haul operations. Not military hardware. Industrial fabrication. But when I looked at the schematics, I realized something. The crane was not a cargo ship anymore. It was a factory. I sent an encrypted signal immediately. Captain George Aldwick answered 4 minutes later. He looked exhausted. 53 years old. Heavy grey beard. Eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Behind him, the lights aboard the crane were dimmed to minimum power. Like everyone else still alive, they were hiding. "Commander Devar," he said the second the connection stabilized, "please tell me you have a plan." "Not yet," I answered honestly. "But I'm building one." George nodded slowly. That was enough for him. No speeches. No emotional breakdown. Just exhausted acceptance. "What do you need?" he asked. That question mattered. Not are we doomed. Not can we win. What do you need? That was humanity in its purest form. I transferred the first data package to him. "Stay dark," I ordered. "Maintain current position and await further instructions." George studied the files. Then he looked back at me. "You're thinking asymmetrically." "Yes." A tired smile appeared on his face. "Good," he said quietly. "Because if we fight them normally, we are dead." The connection ended. At hour 9 after the broadcast, I sent another signal. This one mattered even more. Dr. Miriam Osai, xenobiologist. Outpost 44. Edge of the Kuiper Belt. Miriam had spent 11 years studying the Vithrak Dominion. Not their military. Not their politics. Their biology. Their communication systems. The way their species hierarchy actually functioned beneath the surface. Most military analysts studied Dominion fleets. Miriam studied how the Empire thought. That made her far more dangerous. Her reply arrived 23 minutes later. Camera disabled. Voice only. "I wondered how long it would take before somebody called me," she said calmly. "What do you know about their coordination systems?" I asked immediately. Silence. Then her camera activated. She looked exhausted but strangely focused. Like someone who had spent years preparing for a nightmare and was now watching it finally arrive. "More than I ever included in my official reports," she answered. That got my attention instantly. "Explain." Miriam leaned closer to her screen. "The Dominion doesn't operate like independent fleets," she said. "Their entire military structure depends on a centralized coordination architecture called the Veth Grid." Lena entered my quarters halfway through the conversation carrying additional survival reports but stopped speaking when she heard Miriam continue. "Their fleets think collectively, Miriam explained. Communication timing, tactical synchronization, supply routing, even command authority confirmation. Everything passes through the grid. What happens if the grid fails? Lena asked quietly. Miriam looked directly at her. Everything slows down. That sounded unimpressive at first. Miriam noticed my expression immediately. You're thinking like a human commander, she said. The Dominion doesn't. She pulled up diagrams across the screen. Their fleets operate with near-perfect coordination because they depend on it completely. Delays confuse them. Uncertainty disrupts them. Independent action is discouraged culturally and structurally. I stared at the diagrams. An idea started forming. You're saying the Empire is too connected. Yes, Miriam replied softly. And if we interfere with those connections, then the largest empire in the galaxy suddenly starts tripping over its own feet. The room became very quiet, because for the first time since the bombardment, the impossible stopped feeling impossible. At hour 12, I transmitted a second encrypted message to every surviving human signal source. Short, simple, direct. Do not surrender. Do not comply. Maintain position. Humanity is still operational. 43 acknowledgements returned within the next hour. 43 surviving groups. 43 scattered fragments of humanity still listening in the dark. That number became the first hopeful thing I had seen since Earth burned. At hour 14, I called the crew together on the bridge. I spread physical maps across the central table. Handwritten notes. Supply routes. Dominion logistics patterns. Human survivor positions. The crew gathered around silently. 11 people. 1 patrol ship. Against an empire controlling 40 star systems. If someone had walked onto the bridge at that moment, they would have thought we were insane. Maybe we were. They think we are finished, I said. Nobody argued. Because it was true. The Dominion believed 400 million scattered survivors could never threaten them. And honestly, under normal conditions, they were right. If we fight them directly, I continued, we lose. Callum crossed his arms. So what's the alternative? I looked around the table. We stop fighting like a military. That made everybody pay attention. The Dominion studied our fleets, I explained. They studied our official doctrine, our ship classifications, our military structures. I pointed toward the maps. But they never studied humanity itself. Owen frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means humans solve problems differently than empires do. I tapped one of the mining platform locations. We improvise. Another location. We adapt. Another. And when necessary. I looked at Callum. We become extremely unfair. A small smile appeared on Callum's face for the first time since the attack. Miriam's voice came through the bridge speakers. The Dominion also has weaknesses they don't know about. Everybody turned toward the audio system. Miriam continued. The Veth grid has structural vulnerabilities. I discovered them 4 years ago. Lena blinked. You never reported them. Miriam hesitated. Then answered honestly. I was afraid humanity might eventually use them. The bridge stayed silent. Because now, we absolutely were going to use them. Lena pulled up Dominion supply chain maps beside the survival reports. If we interfere with logistics and communications simultaneously, she said slowly, their response coordination collapses. Not permanently, Miriam warned. Doesn't matter, I replied. Everybody looked at me. I pointed toward the Dominion fuel distribution network. 18 major outer system refueling stations. Massive infrastructure hubs supplying military routes. Barely defended because nobody had ever attacked them before. Callum studied the map carefully. We don't have enough firepower. No, I agreed. Then I pointed toward the mining platforms. 47 industrial stations. Each carrying massive excavation explosives designed to break apart asteroids. Callum's eyes widened slightly. Oh. Yes, I said. Owen stared at the calculations. You want to weaponize mining equipment. I want to weaponize whatever survived. George Aldwick joined the meeting remotely from the crane. He had been listening quietly for nearly 20 minutes before finally speaking. "You're building a resistance network out of maintenance workers, cargo crews, and miners." I looked directly at him. "No," I said. "I'm building it out of humans." That was the moment everything changed. Not emotionally. Strategically. Up until then, we had still been thinking like survivors. Now we started thinking like an enemy. A dangerous one. I picked up my pen again and began drawing attack vectors across the paper maps. Fuel routes. Communication relays. Supply chain interruptions. Asymmetric harassment patterns. None of it looked impressive individually. That was the point. We were too small to overpower the Dominion. So instead, we were going to infect it. Thousands of tiny cuts. Confusion. Disruption. Fear. And uncertainty. The exact things large empires hated most. Callum watched the maps slowly fill with new lines. "What do we call this?" he asked quietly. I stared at the operation sheet for several seconds. Then I wrote the name across the top. Operation Annihilation. Not because we planned genocide. Not because we wanted revenge alone. Because we intended to annihilate the one thing the Dominion depended on most. Certainty. And once certainty dies inside an empire, everything else starts dying with it. The Dominion thought the war had already ended. They had no idea humanity had only just started thinking. The Dominion did not realize humanity was fighting back. That was the most important part of the early months. Not our weapons. Not our strategy. Not even the attacks themselves. The important part was confusion. Because the Dominion had spent 800 years crushing civilizations larger than ours. And after every victory, the pattern stayed the same. Resistance collapsed. Survivors surrendered. The Empire absorbed whatever remained. That was how history worked. That was how power worked. At least, that was what the Dominion believed. Humanity became dangerous the moment we refused to follow the pattern. 5 weeks after Earth burned, we had contact with 112 surviving human groups. Mining crews. Deep space stations. Patrol vessels. Civilian transports drifting dark between systems. Every transmission I sent carried the same instructions. Do not broadcast. Do not engage Dominion forces. Remain invisible. Stay alive. But invisibility alone was not enough anymore. Now we needed to become a problem. The crane became the center of everything. George Aldwick transformed that old logistics ship into something no military strategist would ever have predicted. Its manufacturing bays operated 20 hours a day. Metal scraps disappeared into assembly systems. New machines rolled out constantly. Not warships. Something far more useful. Small unmanned delivery craft. Simple. Cheap. Fast. Each one barely larger than an escape pod. No weapon systems. Minimal heat signatures. Almost invisible in deep space. George showed me the first completed batch during a secure transmission. 30 units lined across the loading bay floor. Ugly little machines. Perfect. They'll never see these coming, George said. That's the idea. Each craft carried different payloads depending on the target. Mining explosives for fuel stations. Signal packages for communication relays. Sensor jammers. Power disruptors. Nothing sophisticated individually. But sophistication was not our advantage. Scale was. Miriam Osai worked constantly from Outpost 44. She barely slept anymore. Every time I contacted her, new equations covered the walls behind her. She looked thinner every week. Sharper somehow. Like grief had burned away everything unnecessary. The ghost signal is ready, she told me during one transmission. What exactly does it do? I asked. Miriam activated a simulation. Dominion relay traffic filled the screen. Thousands of synchronized signals flowing perfectly through the Veth grid. Then her program activated. Immediately the network began stuttering. Tiny delays. Misdirected packets. Signals arriving milliseconds late. Nothing catastrophic. That was the genius of it. The system would not fail dramatically. It would fail subtly. Think of it like poisoning rhythm, Miriam explained. The Dominion depends on timing precision. Fleets coordinate movement down to microseconds. She enlarged the simulation. One delay creates another, then another, then another. Across the display, synchronized fleet movements slowly drifted apart. Response times increased. Navigation corrections multiplied. Tactical coordination weakened. It creates uncertainty, I realized. Miriam nodded. And uncertainty terrifies empires. The first phase of Operation Annihilation launched on a Tuesday. I remember because Lena laughed about it briefly before we began. "We are starting an interstellar rebellion on a Tuesday," she said. Callum looked up from his station. "Every terrible human decision starts on a Tuesday." 4 seconds. The bridge laughed. The first real laughter since the bombardment. Then everyone went back to work. 11 mining platforms moved into position silently across the outer systems. George's unmanned craft launched in waves from the crane. Human ships stayed hidden. No fleet movements. No obvious attacks. Nothing the Dominion would recognize as military action. Then the first fuel platform exploded. 3 hours later, another. Then another. 12 total. Not simultaneously. Strategically staggered. Spread across multiple supply sectors. Each explosion ripped apart millions of tons of stored fuel reserves. Dominion logistics routes collapsed instantly. Emergency rerouting began across half their outer systems. And buried inside the wreckage of every destroyed platform. A small transmitter activated. Broadcasting one repeating number. 7 billion. Nothing else. No threats. No signatures. No explanation. Just the number. Later we intercepted fragments of Dominion internal communications. At first, they thought the explosions were accidents. Mechanical failures. Infrastructure instability. Because no enemy fleet had been detected. No military assault recorded. No recognizable weapon signatures identified. That frightened them more than an attack would have. Empires understand enemies. They do not understand uncertainty. Then Miriam's ghost signals reached the outer Veth grid relays. The network did not collapse. That would have been obvious. Instead, it became unreliable. Coordination signals arrived late. Fleet updates duplicated incorrectly. Navigation timing drifted. Supply requests vanished and reappeared. Nothing dramatic. Nothing clear enough to trigger immediate panic. Just endless friction. The kind that slowly drives organizations insane. One intercepted Dominion report described it perfectly. Operational degradation without identifiable cause. They could not even explain what was happening to them. And because they could not explain it, they started distrusting their own systems. That was the beginning. 3 weeks into the operation, Callum intercepted something important. A damaged internal Dominion transmission leaked through one of the disrupted relays. Translation software took 11 minutes to process it. The entire bridge waited silently. Then the final translation appeared on screen. A Dominion fleet officer was requesting clarification from High Command. His exact words were, "What are we fighting?" Nobody on the bridge spoke for several seconds. Then Callum looked up slowly. "They don't know it's us." "No," I answered quietly. "They think something inside their empire is breaking." Lena leaned back in her chair. "That's worse." She was right. An outside enemy creates unity. An invisible problem inside your own system creates paranoia. And paranoia spreads fast inside large organizations. Exactly like infection. The Dominion had called humanity a contagion. Now the contagion was inside their infrastructure. By week 4, something unexpected happened. Something that changed the entire war. One of George's delivery craft passed near a Dominion holding station while traveling toward a relay target. Its passive scanners detected life signs. Lots of them. The station was not military. It was administrative. A processing center. Which meant prison. The data reached my desk 6 minutes later. I stared at it for a long time. Because rescuing prisoners had never been part of the plan. Operation Annihilation depended on staying hidden. Direct intervention created risk. Risk created exposure. Exposure got people killed. I called an emergency meeting. The bridge stayed quiet while everybody reviewed the station data. Then Owen Price spoke. Normally Owen avoided arguments completely. But this time he looked directly at me. If the Dominion realizes humans were nearby, he said carefully, those prisoners die first. That ended the discussion. Nobody argued after that. The mission launched 4 hours later. We used the Ardent's utility shuttle. Not military. Not armored. Barely larger than a civilian transport van. I took Lena and 2 EVA specialists. Callum stayed aboard the Ardent coordinating signals remotely. The holding station sat dark against the stars. Cold. Silent. Completely unprepared for anyone coming. The Dominion had ruled for centuries without challenge. That kind of power creates laziness. We dock through a maintenance access port. Cut through 2 internal barriers using mining equipment. Reached the detention section in under 20 minutes. 3 species were being held inside. The Char, tall grey-skinned beings from a conquered border system. The Melendi, smaller creatures communicating through sound and colour changes. And the Creel, quiet, thin, careful people who had apparently spent decades inside Dominion labour systems. The Creel elder who approached us looked ancient. Not physically weak. Just tired in a way that seemed deeper than age. She stared at me through the cell barrier while translation software struggled to process her language. Finally, the translator stabilized. "You are human," she said slowly. "Yes." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "The Dominion said your species was gone." The Dominion was mistaken. For the first time, the old woman smiled. A tiny expression, but real. "You came back," she whispered. I looked behind her at hundreds of prisoners staring toward us silently. "Yes," I said. "We did." We evacuated 112 prisoners over the next 72 hours. George made room aboard the crane without hesitation. He always made room. That rescue changed everything. Because liberated prisoners talk. And people trapped under empires listen carefully when somebody finally fights back. The Creel elder eventually came to me carrying hand-drawn maps. Real maps. Dominion infrastructure. Administrative pathways. Internal transport routes. Things no human intelligence agency had ever possessed. She spread the papers across my desk carefully. "The Warlord Council believes itself untouchable," she said. I studied the maps. "Is it?" The elder looked at me for a very long moment. Then she pushed one specific map closer. "There is always a door," she said quietly. Somewhere across Dominion space, fuel stations still burned. Communication failures continued spreading. Prisoners disappeared from secured facilities. And now rumors were beginning to circulate across neutral systems. Rumors about humans. About survivors. About a dead species that refused to stay dead. The galaxy was paying attention now. Not openly. Not bravely. But quietly. Carefully. Watching. And somewhere deep inside the Dominion's central command systems, powerful people were beginning to ask a terrifying question. What if humanity was still alive? That question would eventually change the galaxy. But at that moment, it only changed me. Because sitting there in my quarters, staring at the Elder's map spread across the desk, I realized something. Operation Annihilation was no longer about survival. It had become something else entirely. Humanity was learning how to haunt an empire. And we were getting very good at it. The first real mistake I made during the war cost 4,300 lives. I still remember every second of the transmission. Outpost 31 was a frontier mining station near the outer edge of explored space. Small population. Families. Engineers. Medical staff. Children. Nothing strategically important. Which was exactly why I thought they were safe. Commander Alan Birch had received my early transmissions during the first week after Earth burned. He followed every instruction perfectly. No broadcasts. No open communication. No movement. Stay dark. Stay alive. Then the Dominion found them anyway. Even now, years later, I still do not know how. Maybe a signal leak. Maybe random patrol detection. Maybe new tracking systems we did not know about yet. Or maybe war is simply cruel enough that sometimes doing everything correctly still gets people killed. The alert reached the Ardent during third shift. Lena picked it up first. Her face changed instantly. Commander. I was already moving toward her station before she finished speaking. The transmission appeared on the main screen. Static filled most of it. Emergency lights flashed somewhere behind Alan Birch as alarm screamed through the outpost corridors. He looked exhausted, but calm. Too calm. Commander Devar, he said, breathing hard. Dominion Eraser Fleet has entered attack range. My stomach dropped instantly. The Eraser Fleet. An old Dominion Rapid Response Extermination Division designed specifically for eliminating surviving resistance populations. Fast ships. Heavy weapons. No negotiation protocols. If they found you, you disappeared. Alan continued speaking. We cannot evacuate in time. Explosions shook the background. Someone behind him was yelling evacuation codes. Then Alan looked directly into the camera. Continue the operation, he said quietly. The transmission ended. 49 seconds total. That was all we got. Then Outpost 31 vanished from every scanner we had. Nobody on the bridge moved. Nobody spoke. 4,300 people. Gone. Because the Dominion had found them. I stood there staring at the dead screen for a very long time. Not angry. Not yet. Just hollow. The crew watched me carefully. Waiting. Callum Gray finally broke the silence. He had not slept properly in weeks. Dark circles under his eyes. Hands shaking slightly from exhaustion. Is the plan still working? He asked. The question sounded colder than he intended. But I understood what he meant. Not emotionally. Strategically. Was Operation Annihilation still damaging the Dominion? Yes, I answered. Callum nodded once. Then we continue. Nobody disagreed. But something inside me shifted after Outpost 31. Because until then, the operation had felt distant in a strange way. Careful. Controlled. Sabotage and ghost signals and hidden attacks carried out across enormous distances. But now, 4,300 people had died while trusting my instructions. That changes a person. Especially when you are the one giving orders. I returned to the Elders maps that night. Specifically one location. The Warlord Council Chamber. The center of Dominion authority. The 11 beings responsible for authorizing Earth's bombardment. The Elder had shown me maintenance access paths leading beneath the Capital Defense Systems weeks earlier. At the time, it felt impossible. Now, nothing felt impossible anymore. Only dangerous. The problem was the planetary shield network. The Dominion capital planet sat beneath the strongest defense grid in their empire. No fleet could break through it directly. But shields need maintenance. Maintenance requires infrastructure. And infrastructure always contains weaknesses. The original infiltration plan required temporarily disabling one section of the shield network for exactly 40 minutes. Miriam had developed the pulse system herself. It would not damage the planet. Would not kill civilians. But it would create a gap. A small opening large enough for an insertion team. There was only one problem. The shield relay point sat above a heavily populated region. 300 million civilians lived beneath that section of the defense grid. If anything went wrong during the operation, if Dominion fleet units reacted unpredictably, if orbital systems malfunctioned, then those civilians would be exposed during the shield disruption. The risk was low, but not zero. And that mattered. I called a full strategy meeting aboard the Ardent. By then, our command network had grown larger. Former military officers. Civilian engineers. Surviving ship commanders. Resistance coordinators. The closest thing humanity had left to leadership. Admiral Warren Torres attended remotely from one of the surviving warships. 61 years old. Veteran of 3 border conflicts. Hard man. Practical man. The kind of officer history usually produces during terrible times. I laid out the infiltration plan carefully. Then explained the civilian risk. Torres studied the map silently. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. We strike, he said. Simple. Direct. No hesitation. The civilians are not our target, he continued. The responsibility belongs to the Dominion. They are still civilians, I answered. Torres looked at me evenly. The Dominion killed 7 billion humans. I know. Then why are we debating this? Because that was the question, wasn't it? Why hesitate? Why care? The Dominion certainly hadn't. I looked around the room slowly. At exhausted people carrying impossible grief. At survivors who had every reason to hate. Then I answered honestly. Because if we stop caring who gets hurt, I said quietly, then eventually we become them. Nobody spoke after that. Miriam's voice came through the communication speakers. The civilian population had no role in Earth's bombardment, she said. The Dominion is hierarchical. Decisions come from the top. Torres crossed his arms. And while we debate morality, the Empire rebuilds. Yes, Miriam replied calmly. That is the cost of remaining civilized. The room became very quiet, because everyone understood the truth underneath her words. Morality becomes hardest exactly when violence feels justified. Callum Gray had remained silent through most of the meeting. Then suddenly he spoke. No. Everybody turned toward him. His face looked exhausted, but steady. We don't use the shield gap, he said. Torres frowned. Callum. No, Callum repeated. My city burned too. My family died too. And I'm still saying no. He pointed toward the maps. We find another way. The room stayed silent. Because when someone carrying that much loss refuses revenge, it becomes difficult to argue for it yourself. I looked back at the elders' infrastructure diagrams. Hours passed. One route after another failed simulation testing. Too exposed. Too slow. Too dangerous. Then finally, I found another entrance. Not through the atmospheric shield relay. Through the orbital maintenance infrastructure itself. Older. More complicated. Far more dangerous for the infiltration team. But completely isolated from civilian population zones. No shield disruption required. No civilian exposure. Just one terrible insertion route through ancient service corridors deep beneath Dominion orbital systems. I rebuilt the operation overnight. The new version added 11 days to the timeline. Detection risk increased significantly. Casualty probability nearly doubled. But civilian risk dropped to 0. The next morning I presented the revised plan. Torres stared at it silently for nearly a minute. This is much harder, he said. Yes. Your team may not survive. Yes. And you're still choosing this version. Yes. Another long silence. Then slowly. Torres nodded. All right, he said quietly. That was it. No dramatic speech. No applause. Just tired agreement from people trying very hard not to lose themselves. George Aldwick immediately began rebuilding equipment configurations aboard the crane. Lena rerouted communication protocols. Miriam updated infiltration timing. Everybody adapted. That was humanity's real strength. Not violence. Adaptation. We kept moving. Even when grief tried to stop us. Later that night, I stood alone in one of the Ardent's observation corridors. The stars beyond the glass looked cold and endless. Somewhere out there, the Eraser fleet was still hunting survivors. Somewhere else, Dominion officials still believed humanity was collapsing. And somewhere beneath all of it, 7 billion dead followed every decision I made. Not like ghosts. More like weight. A constant pressure reminding me what failure cost. I thought about Alan Birch's final transmission. Continue the operation. He had known he was about to die. And he still chose the mission. Not because he hated the Dominion more than he loved life, but because he understood something important. Humanity was no longer fighting only for survival. We were fighting for the right to remain human afterward. That distinction mattered. Maybe more than victory itself. I closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them again. The decision was made. We would infiltrate the Dominion capital. We would confront the Warlord Council directly. And we would do it without becoming monsters along the way. Because the easiest thing in the universe after suffering enormous pain is convincing yourself everyone else deserves it too. I refuse to let humanity become that species. Even after 7 billion dead. especially after 7 billion dead. The infiltration countdown began the next morning. 11 days until Operation Annihilation entered its final phase. And for the first time since Earth burned, the Dominion itself was about to feel fear. The final phase of Operation Annihilation took 11 days to prepare, and 7 minutes to force an empire to kneel. People always imagine moments like that as loud. Explosions, gunfire, heroes charging through smoke. But history is usually quieter than that. History often changes inside silent rooms while exhausted people make impossible decisions. The 11 days before the infiltration were the most stressful of my life. Nobody slept properly anymore. George Aldwick kept the crane's fabrication systems running almost non-stop. Delivery craft continued launching toward Dominion infrastructure targets. Miriam's ghost signals still spread through the Veth grid like a disease the Empire could not diagnose. And across deep space, surviving human ships remained hidden, waiting. Every 48 hours I sent the same message to every surviving human group. Hold position. We are not finished. Then, 4 days before launch, something happened that changed everything. A signal arrived on a non-human frequency Miriam had been monitoring. Weak. Encrypted. Carefully hidden. Translation took several hours. When it finally decoded, the message surprised all of us. It came from the Char Resistance Network, the same species we had rescued from the Dominion holding station. Their government in exile had been watching the Veth grid disruptions, watching fuel depots explode, watching Dominion systems slowly unravel. And for the first time in decades, someone believed the Empire could actually bleed. The message was simple. We cannot help you openly. We are afraid, but we will not betray your position. Then they attached something else. An orbital maintenance access code for the Dominion Capital Defense Ring. 6 years old. Possibly outdated. Possibly useless. Possibly the single most important thing anyone had handed us since the war began. I stared at the message for a very long time, because fear had not stopped them from helping. That mattered. Before the war, humanity believed the galaxy was mostly indifferent. Now we were learning something else. The galaxy had been waiting for somebody to resist. George contacted me 2 hours later. The Melendi want to join the infiltration team. I blinked. How many? 12. The small color-shifting aliens we had rescued from the prison station had volunteered. Not soldiers. Not trained operatives. Former prisoners. George hesitated slightly before continuing. They say they know Dominion administrative layouts better than we do. I looked out the viewport for several seconds before answering. Ask them if they understand the risks. George turned away from the screen briefly, communicating with the Melendi representative beside him through translation software. Then he looked back. They understand completely, he said quietly. The final team numbered 23. Me. Lena. Callum. 3 ardent crew specialists. The Elder. 7 Creel volunteers. And 12 Melendi moving specialists. An army assembled from survivors, prisoners, mechanics, scientists, and exhausted civilians. Humanity's last hope did not look impressive. But maybe that was the point. The launch happened in complete silence. 4 separate shuttles departed from 4 separate hidden locations across the outer system. No formation flying. No military escort. Nothing that looked threatening. We converged on the far side of the Dominion capital planet 6 hours later beneath the shadow of the orbital maintenance ring. Far above us, the planet glowed beneath massive city lights stretching across entire continents. The heart of the Empire. Untouched by war. Until now. Admiral Torres and the surviving human fleet remained hidden nearby. 18 vessels total. 2 actual warships. The rest cargo ships, mining transports, and retrofitted civilian craft. Not enough to win a war. Enough to witness one ending. The Char access code worked on the 3rd attempt. The maintenance hatch opened silently. Cold blue light spilled into the corridor beyond. Nobody spoke. The Elder moved first. She walked through those corridors like someone returning to a place she had escaped from in nightmares. The Melendi spread ahead in pairs. Fast. Silent. Every junction cleared using coded light pulses. Green meant safe. No alarms triggered. No resistance appeared. The Dominion had never imagined anyone reaching this far. That arrogance became our greatest ally. Lena managed communications the entire time through encrypted whisper channels. Outer corridor clear. Transit junction ahead. 12 minutes to target. Her voice stayed calm. Steadier than mine. Callum walked beside me carrying the transmission device he had built during sleepless nights aboard the Ardent. A simple-looking machine. Small enough to hold in one hand. Powerful enough to change galactic history. If activated, it would broadcast every piece of evidence we had collected to every known communication frequency across nearby systems. Proof of the bombardment. Proof of Dominion atrocities. Proof that humanity had survived. And proof that the Empire could be hurt. The Warlord Council chamber sat on the third internal level beneath the orbital ring. Miriam had confirmed through intercepted communications that the Council would be gathered there during our infiltration window. Because we had made sure they would be. For 4 days, false fleet movement signals had spread through the damaged Veth grid. Fake reports suggesting surviving human forces were massing near the Orion threshold. The Dominion believed humanity was preparing another strike. In reality, humanity was already inside their capital. We reached the final chamber door with 7 minutes remaining. The Elder placed one hand against the access panel. Then she looked at me. "I waited 60 years for this moment," she said softly. "You should enter first." The door opened inward. The room beyond was massive. Circular. 11 council members sat around a curved central platform beneath glowing holographic displays. 9 Vithrak warlords. 1 administrative liaison. 1 species I did not recognize. The room became completely silent the second I walked inside. Nobody moved. Nobody understood what they were seeing. The High Warlord himself sat at the center. Tall. Silver armored skin. 6 black eyes reflecting the chamber lights. He stared at me the way someone stares at a ghost. "You are human," he said finally. The translation reached my earpiece half a second later. "Yes." Silence. Then, "There are no humans." I looked directly at him. "There are approximately 400 million humans," I answered calmly. "And you have been at war with them for the last 2 months without realizing it." The room remained frozen. I kept speaking. The fuel station attacks were us. The Veth grid disruptions were us. The prisoner liberations were us. I stepped forward slowly. This is us. For the first time since entering the room, I saw fear. Not panic. Not terror. Something colder. The fear powerful people experience when reality stops behaving the way they expected. The High Warlord studied me carefully. Then asked the question every empire eventually asks. What do you want? Such an ancient question. Because power always assumes conflict is transactional. That everybody wants territory. Resources. Control. Something negotiable. I thought about Earth. About burning oceans. About Alan Birch's final transmission. About 7 billion names. Then I answered. Accountability. One of the council members shifted slightly. The High Warlord narrowed his eyes. You cannot defeat the Dominion. No, I agreed calmly. Not militarily. That answer confused him more than resistance would have. I gestured toward the room around us. But in 2 months, a scattered survivor population with almost no military resources penetrated your infrastructure repeatedly. I pointed upward toward the orbital systems above us. We disrupted your logistics. We damaged your communications. We liberated prisoners from secured facilities. And now we are standing inside your most protected chamber without triggering a single alarm. The room stayed silent. Because every word was true. I took another step forward. The question is not whether humanity can destroy your empire. I looked directly into all 6 of his eyes. The question is how much damage 400 million determined survivors can inflict over the next 20 years if this continues. That landed. I saw it land. Because suddenly the Dominion understood something terrifying. Humanity did not need to win traditionally. We only needed to become impossible to eliminate. Callum stepped beside me and raised the transmission device. This broadcasts everything in 7 minutes, he said quietly. Every system. Every species. Every border network. He looked around the chamber. If Commander Devar does not enter the shutdown code before the timer expires. He let the sentence finish itself. The High Warlord stared at the device. You are threatening the Dominion. No, I answered softly. We are introducing consequences. Silence again. Heavy silence. The kind that changes civilizations. Finally, the High Warlord spoke. What does accountability require? The 11 council members responsible for Earth's bombardment surrender themselves to neutral tribunal authority. Shock spread across several faces immediately. You ask the rulers of the Dominion to surrender. No, I corrected. I am asking 11 individuals to answer for one decision. I leaned slightly closer. Because if they do not. I glanced toward Callum's timer. Then the galaxy learns the Dominion bleeds. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. Then something unexpected happened. The council did not fight. No guards stormed the room. No desperate last attack. Because the Dominion finally understood the truth. This was no longer a war against a weak species. This was a war against an idea. And ideas are much harder to kill. The timer reached 4 minutes. Then 3. Finally, the High Warlord lowered his head slightly. We will discuss tribunal terms, he said quietly. Callum entered the shutdown code. The timer stopped. Humanity had won. Not completely. Not cleanly. But enough. The negotiations lasted months afterward. The tribunal took years. The 11 council members eventually stood before a neutral 7-species court while the entire galaxy watched. But honestly, that was not the most important part. The most important part happened 1 day later. I used Callum's transmission system one final time. No threats. No speeches. No victory declaration. Just names. 7 billion names humanity had managed to recover from destroyed databases, colony records, civilian archives, and ship manifests. Every person we could identify. The transmission spread outward through the galaxy at light speed. Some systems received it in weeks. Some in years. Some would not receive it for centuries. But eventually every civilized world would hear them. 7 billion names. Proof that humanity had existed. Proof that humanity had survived. And proof that the Dominion had failed. Weeks later, the Ardent finally returned to Earth orbit. The planet still carried scars from the bombardment. Entire regions blackened. Orbital debris drifting silently above ruined continents. Beside me at the observation window, the Elder stared at Earth for a very long time. Finally, she spoke quietly. It is still here. Yes. The Dominion tried to erase it. Yes. She nodded slowly. But they failed. I looked down at the damaged world below us. At returning ships emerging from deep space one by one. At 400 million survivors slowly coming home. Then I answered. Yes, I said softly. They failed. Callum joined us at the viewport. He still carried the transmission device in his hand. He had carried it ever since the council chamber. After several minutes, he finally asked the question all of us had been carrying. Was it worth it? Not aggressive. Not angry. Just honest. I thought carefully before answering. I don't think survival is something you measure by worth, I said quietly. I think sometimes survival is simply necessary. He nodded slowly. Outside the viewport, sunlight slowly crossed Earth's horizon. The same sunrise humanity had watched for thousands of years. Still happening. Lena stepped beside us silently. They called us a contagion, she said. Yes. She looked down at Earth. You know the interesting thing about contagions? What? They spread because they change environments around them. I looked at her. And what did humanity change? She thought about it for a moment. Then answered softly. The idea that even the strongest empire in the galaxy can be forced to answer for what it does. Nobody spoke after that. Below us, Earth continued turning slowly through the light. Scarred. Broken. Alive. The Dominion had burned 7 billion human lives. And humanity had answered with the one thing empires fear most. We survived.